Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week I am once again joined by Janine Mercer of the ODDentity Podcast. Now, if you tuned in last week, you'll know that Janine was on the show then, and this is a part 2, so, be sure to go back and check out part 1 if you haven't already. If you haven't, no worries, it's still a great chat anyway. Just before we get started, I'll give a brief overview of what's to come. There'll be a quick promo, and then the chat will get straight into it. So, just to come in this episode, there's health and finite living, dealing with the deaths of people we've sort of known, and friends and family, that sort of thing. And we speak about passing on stories, talk about the difference between folklore and urban legends, and then we basically finish up with a talk about horror stories and special effects. There's a lot more in between that, but they're the key points. Don't want to kind of bore you with all the details at the start. So, the promo is going to be from Games My Mum Found podcast. There's a link to them in the description. Be sure to go check those guys out. And that's about it from me. So, check in right at the end and I'll give a bit more detail of what's to come in future episodes, a bit more of a rambly, messy thing of certain stuff to come. But yeah, check us out on social media, subscribe in all the usual places, share if you think it deserves it. And I'll chat with you guys at the end.
Do you like podcasts? Of course you do. You're listening to one right now. Are you a fan of retro video games? Are you a fan of listening to a bunch of weirdos complain about great games from our past? Well, we've got the show for you. It's called Games My Mom Found. We are a retro video game podcast where each week we grab a different guest and dive into a game. Some are great, some not so much. We'd love for you to take a listen and join our hilarious antics. You can find us on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. Probably the same place you found the amazing show you're currently listening to. We'd love for you to tune in to Games My Mom Found. New episodes up every Monday.
Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton. A friend of mine, actually a good friend, who's also been on the podcast. Everyone I care about has been the podcast. Not really. But my friend, his name's Callum, he's actually had swine flu. And he actually missed one of his school exams because he was ill with it. So like he joked about it like quite soon after. He was like, don't worry guys, I'm all better, but I could have died, like laughing. It's like, dude, it's like, we know, like you were off school for like a long time. Like I'm glad he's like finding sort of it's one of those weird things with sort of death, isn't it, with being morbid in a sort of way. And obviously there's a degree of being very being very pessimistic and cynical and being like a nihilist and saying everything's pointless and everyone's going to die anyway all the time, and that's a bit much. But healthily discussing that one of the things that makes life beautiful is the fact that it doesn't last forever. You watch any animals, any trees are just a big cycle of life, aren't they? Of just this big cycle. All kinds of things in nature is just a cycle. And it's like, well, even if you don't believe anything comes after when one dies, it's still a case of, well, you've still got your sort of life to go, but you will eventually die. Like that's just one thing, everyone's going to happen. Right. And some people get really, really uncomfortable talking about the fact that people are going to die. And I find that obviously in your show, it comes up a fair amount. So did you find there was like anything that kind of, have you always been okay with it? Or was there like sort of, like with me, it was obviously my dad passing away, my family, my nan passed away, then the year later my dad, then the year later my uncle. So it was quite a big thing when I was like 18, 19. So it was like that I came to grips with it quite quickly. So was there anything in your life without trying to delve too deep into your personal life of any family members? But you know what I mean? Like, have you always had that sort of more chilled perspective on it? Or has it been like, was there an event that kind of caused it?
I mean, I feel like I've always just kind of been that kind of person who just feels like when the time is here, it's here. And that's kind of it. I obviously have the choice. I can exercise and live healthily and do whatever to kind of postpone the inevitable, but I'm not going to live forever. The people that are close to me are not going to live forever. My wife is not going to live forever. The ridiculous animals, the furry babies that we have are not going to live forever. It's just that is life. And for me, I think life has always just kind of meant death. I know that sounds like super duper morbid. It makes me sound a little crazy, but I've always been fascinated by the concept that, the minute that we are born, we begin to die. And that's just, it's just the way that it is. And it's just something that it's going to come. Like I said, I can eat all the green vegetables I want and exercise every day, but that's not going to keep me from getting hit by a city bus as I'm crossing the street one day, or being crushed by, a jet engine from an airplane. It's not going to help me with that. I guess I've always been kind of a firm believer that we have our time on this earth and it is finite, and you kind of do as much as you can, and you try not to have too terribly much unfinished business, because I feel like that was the premise of the movie The Frighteners with Michael J. Fox. So you don't want any of that shit. You want to kind of
definitely don't.
You want to do the karaoke and the skydiving and eat the hottest chili in the world and just do all of that shit, because ultimately, the end is going to, we're going to get there. And for some of us, for example, I had a cousin who passed away, like 3 years ago, maybe. She was very, very young, and she started a chain of lemonade stands because she was trying to fund children who had gone through chemo.
Oh, okay.
So that they could go to like Disney World and like have, like do fun things. And she passed away, like I said, about 3 years ago. And, I think she was 12. So, was her purpose in life to be born and get cancer and then start a whole bunch of lemonade stands to make a whole bunch of other people happy and then be done? Like what is our purpose? We don't really know. We just kind of do the best we can. And I think that that's the whole point of life. You just, you do the best you can. And I feel like as I've gotten older, I've just kind of, I don't know if come to terms with it is the right terminology, but like my mother passed away like 4 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, I lost my Uncle Leo, he was on the older side, and he had diabetes, and it was a thing. It's expected, after a while, you get old and you run out of time.
Yeah.
But I've been very lucky so far that a lot of the people in my life, I haven't experienced direct loss. Like, my Uncle Leo, well, he was a great uncle. So, when your great uncle dies, you mourn and you feel bad and whatever, but I didn't really know him all that well. And, he was my grandmother's brother, and you kind of have that, it's almost like a buffer or a removal. So you don't really get that.
Yeah.
When my mom died, she had several different kinds of cancer, and she also had bipolar disorder before they knew what it was. But we were 22 years estranged. We hadn't seen each other in 22 years. And so when she passed away, I was like, well, how am I supposed to feel about that? Yeah. I don't really know where to go with that. And it's funny because when you're that far removed from somebody, it's almost like you don't have the baggage, but you feel like you should.
Yeah.
It's just kind of, it's heavy, but it's almost like it's not on you. Like there's somebody, you're at the train station, there's somebody running behind you with bags saying, excuse me, miss, this is your baggage. Like you're supposed to, be carrying this, and you're just almost oblivious to it. And it's very, very strange, but yeah, I've been lucky in the way that like, my grandmother now is, she's almost 90. My grandfather is almost 90. They're getting up there. My father is, I believe, 65, 66. My stepmother is still, fairly young. So, it's not necessarily something that's going to come super soon, but you don't know when that jet engine is going to come.
Well, yeah, exactly.
So it's just really like, you just kind of, you take it day by day and whatever.
It's almost like a generational thing as well, isn't it? It's like as one goes through sort of most parts in their life in a standard, in air quotes, sort of way. If no freak accidents happen, everyone just kind of does the nice thing of dying of old age. It is a part of, when you're young and you're a teenager, going from a teenager to sort of a young adult, often that's, depending on how old your family is, either it's sort of grandparents or often great grandparents. It's that sort of thing. And then as you get to your sort of 30s to 40s, then it can be sort of, then the sort of next level of family, aunties and uncles, potentially, that sort of thing. Right. And obviously when you get to your 60s, 70s, 80s, then your parents and that general sort of scope of things. And it's one thing that you kind of, even when you're younger, if you have pets and things and you have like a rabbit or like a guinea pig or something like that, also guinea pig hamsters only live a few years, you come to terms with that sort of thing more, more quickly, but as you say, it's not as it's like easing you into it. You know, when certain,
Right.
For most people, the parents or siblings, if depending on the age of the siblings, if your parents or siblings pass away and they are very close to you, that hits you very hard compared to, as you say, if you're, one of my, great aunties passed away. So that's obviously a shame. That's sad, but unless I had a real connection with her,
right.
I can't be unbelievably grieving stricken, but for every loss of people. So it is a strange thing as you sort of get older, it's different people not being there, it becomes a different thing. And are you saying where you kind of feel like you should feel bad for it, but
right.
in a really almost cynical way of saying things, it's like almost in a sense like people do kind of pass away every day, and it's like if you don't have that feeling, regardless of the past with that person, it can be almost like, well, a lot of people die. It's just part of life. Everyone can kind of get over it. And if you don't feel bad about this one individual person as much as you feel like you should have, it's not the end of the world. It's kind of it's how you deal with whichever aspect of things that happen when people pass away and stuff.
Well, right. And, like you said, regarding age, I mean, I feel like, for example, my Aunt Margaret passed away, and you'll love this. She was like a carbon copy of the Queen.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
She looked just like Queen Elizabeth. It was hilarious. And she was like 4.5 feet tall. She was an amazing woman. And she lived an amazing life. She adopted like 13 children, plus she had like 4 of her own. And all of these children had birth defects or something that they had to be hospitalized for. And I mean, when you say someone is a saint, like my Aunt Margaret was a saint, like the woman was a saint.
Immediately sounds like one.
I mean, she just took her whole life and kind of put it on the back burner and raised these children as her own. And I mean, even, she passed away, I think 2 years ago now, but I mean, her children that she had adopted, they would still come back with their families and visit her and whatever. But the thing that I find really interesting about my Aunt Margaret is she passed away, and she was like 98 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I was not like inconsolable about it. And I thought I would be. But the interesting thing about it is I think as we get older, we create narratives. I mean, we create narratives anyway, because human beings are narrative animals and whatever. And this is my communication background and yada, yada, bullshit. Feel free to cut this out. But we have the tendency to create stories to not only remember, events, whatever, but to remember people by. And so for me, it's not, oh yeah, well, my Aunt Marg passed away 2 years ago, and she had pneumonia and she wasn't able to kick it, and she just passed away. It's, oh yeah, my Aunt Margaret, she raised these 13 kids as her own, and she was an amazing person, and she was only like 4.5 feet tall, and she was like superhero, and whatever. And this is the story that sticks with me, not she died and this is, the circumstances surrounding her death. It's not the obituary, just that straightforward obit in a shitty newspaper. It's everything that came before that. So I feel like life as you get older is more about the journey than it is about the stop. And in some cases, the sudden stop.
More exciting stuff. I want to be like blow up an explosion of confetti and 1,000 fireworks. That'd be a cool way to die.
Well, I think that, and I only use the example of a jet engine falling on her head because that show Death Becomes Me. I don't know if you remember that show, but it was a hilarious show.
I vaguely know of it, but I can't say I've seen it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, she becomes this like 12-year-old girl becomes a Grim Reaper.
Oh, wow.
And she dies because a jet engine falls on her head or something.
Oh, I see.
Oh, no. You know what? It's a toilet seat. Never mind.
I was thinking of Donnie Darko.
Donnie Darko was really good too.
I think that's what, I think he dies from
was it a jet? Yep. Mm-hmm. I'm getting my wires crossed.
But please continue, sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I keep using this analogy because to me, that's the sudden stop. Like, this is where your elevator stops. I'm sorry, everybody has to get out. There are no more floors. You are done. And for me, I don't know, I guess I collect the narratives that I need. And I think as I've gotten older, I've become kind of a narrative resurrectionist, where I take these narratives and I tell them to other people. And then those other people tell them to other people. And it's almost like these people live on through the stories that you're telling, which I think is kind of cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's beautiful. That's how many tribes, especially the indigenous tribes, for centuries, if not longer, used to spread things, wasn't it? Apart from certain tribes doing sort of cave paintings and things like that, generally it was stories and legends. I mean, regardless of one sort of stance on religion or anything like that, religion is just stories. I mean, obviously most of them have, if not all of them, have doctrine, specific things that are written down. But there was a point before that where they were just spoken, and for many years, a lot of the religions before they were written in text could be translated, all these sorts of things. It was spoken through stories, and throughout human existence, stories is a big thing of people. You tell children bedtime stories before they go to bed. Everyone watches movies and reads books. Well, everyone should read books, but not as many people read books as they should. But there's books and stories, movies, and people just. Even podcasts making such a resurgence, audio dramas and things like that, and audiobooks, even just people throughout history. One of my favorite things about going to museums and seeing sort of, from the style of you go old Chinese, tapestries and things like that from Eastern culture, Japan and China and all the sort of, that side of the world. And then you go you flip it and you go to, sort of certain places in Europe, sort of really, really old. You can go to the Vikings, things like that. And you can kind of dot around, but everywhere has got that consistent storytelling element with, and obviously the Greeks, so vases and things, that's one of the very famous thing, where all the designs on them, you have all the storytelling elements that have always been going on throughout history, but every culture has their own style in a sense of telling the stories. And I think it's just amazing when you go back and just see how similar people were to how they are now in so many intricate ways, but we've just kind of added layers of complication between them.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, in my culture, I mean, that's how we relay the information that we want to relay. We do it through story or we do it through song. And I mean, there are a lot of stories and songs that in Newfoundland culture they're not written down. People just are told what the story is by a member of their family. And then that story is transmitted through, around a campfire or in front of a wood stove. And then you have that story, and it's something that you can keep with you until you decide to transfer it to somebody else. And I mean, that's very true of folk fiction as well. I write a fair bit of folk fiction. And a lot of my folk fiction basically hinges on all of these small outpour communities in Newfoundland that have maybe 200 people living in them. And they're generally set back in the quote unquote the olden days. So maybe Victorian era, but they talk about the way life is and the superstitions and the way that physicians practiced and the way that, for certain things you would rather go to, a midwife than have a doctor deliver your baby, because the midwife has done it, more effectively than the doctor ever could, and whatever. Even something as simple as if you have rheumatism, you carry a potato around in your pocket, and that's supposed to prevent rheumatism.
Oh, wow.
If you have trouble sleeping, you go to the grave of a pious man and you get a pebble from his grave and you stick it under your tongue, and that's supposed to help you sleep. I mean, there's just all of these little idiosyncrasies that come together to make a culture and turn that culture into folklore.
Yeah. I mean, one of the strange things that I find with, I'm an individual who, with sort of supernatural things, that's not specifically folklore, but, obviously a lot of folklore, it's wrapped up in a lot of these supernatural things and stuff like absolutely. That. But it's one of those things where with one thing I do not subscribe to is the concept of luck, whether or not it's a good luck or bad luck. I've got no problem with people who do believe things are lucky or unlucky. That's not a problem. But just, I generally don't believe in luck or good luck. And one of the things I kind of, if I have an argument with someone about it, which I try not to do, but if I do end up having a discussion or something about luck or something with someone, one example I bring up, which is it links in with folklore, is with black cats, the strange thing is obviously in a lot of the Western cultures, they're bad luck, but in the Eastern cultures, they're more good luck.
Yep.
And it's a very interesting idea. Like, I'm not going to get into the argument of luck or things. Obviously on this podcast, anyone can believe whatever they want, really. But that sort of just interesting part of sort of it intertwined with both luck and folklore is that when you look into a lot of these things that people believed caused bad luck and things, a lot of it is to do with part of the folklore, or because a lot of the bad luck with black cats is the sort of the witches and things, and that's one of the associates, which I'm sure you know a lot of these sort of things about. But it is interesting that folklore in that sort of regard can shape something as ambiguous as luck. It's just a folklore part of, believing witches and trying to, them having black cats made bad luck and killed our crops and things. It's just very interesting of that sort of side of folklore and luck, I'd say.
Yeah, there's a piece that I recently completed that's a very old folk legend. I believe it's Irish, but it's about a girl who is not as attractive as her sister, or perceives herself not to be as attractive as her sister. And they're waiting at home one evening in front of the fire, and they're doing stitching or whatever women did way back when. And so there's a knock on the door. And when they open the door, there's this gentleman standing there in all of this finery. And he's a very attractive man. And he says that he's looking for the supposedly less attractive sister because he wants to invite her to a dance. Well, minutes before she opened the door, her sister had said, well, you're not picky about who you would dance with, right? And she says, no, I would dance with the devil if he'd have me. So then when she opens the door and this well-dressed gentleman is there, he invites her to the dance. They go to the dance. She starts dancing with him, and suddenly she realizes that she's actually dancing with the devil. Mm. And then they have to perform this elaborate ritual in order to banish the devil or whatever. But I mean, it's like, so what is it? It's a piece of folklore, but what was it designed to do? Well, it was designed to keep women in their place, because you don't want women to have all these wild ideas going off and doing anything that they want to do. That's ridiculous, right? So you say, well, she said that she danced with the devil, and all of a sudden the devil was there and she had to dance with him. And, she's a good Christian woman, and, religion comes into it, and it's, a big thing. Folklore generally is created for the same reason that urban legends are created, which is another one of my passions.
And how are urban legends different from folklore? I'm not an expert at these things, but what is the sort of difference between them? Well,
urban legends generally, they originate from, if we're talking about folklore is it's almost tactile, because folklore is intertwined, and this is just my opinion, but folklore is intertwined into cultures. And so it has that kind of cultural dynamic. So if you hear of, the tale of the Wendigo, very popular form of Native American folklore, the same as, wraiths or skinwalkers or, what have you, that's very much entrenched in folklore. An urban legend falls into the category of like a story that you tell to scare somebody around a fire. And that's basically it. It is what it is on the surface, and there's nothing else underneath it. It's almost like a magic trick. You tell somebody a piece of urban legend. Like, for example, I had this friend. It didn't happen to me. It happened to a friend of a friend of a friend of mine somewhere along the line. There's no credibility in it. She went home one day to find her dog choking. So she took the dog to the vet. And the vet said, well, there's nothing you can do here. We have to bring the dog into surgery, so you can just go home. So she gets home. She unpacks the car because she stopped for groceries, what have you. She gets up to her door. She unlocks the door, puts the groceries down, phone rings. It's the vet. The vet says, you have to get out of your house right now. Immediately, please get out of your house. And the woman protests slightly, but eventually she gives in because the vet seems insistent. So she gets out on the lawn, and 2 seconds later, the cops swarm in. They go into her house. They go into a back bedroom, into a closet. And there's a guy with a 12-inch butcher knife sitting in the closet, lying in wait, and he's missing 2 fingers. And that's what the dog was choking on.
Oh, wow.
Now, that's a fantastic urban legend. Never actually happened, but, you pull the curtain away. There's nothing actually there. but you're riveted because you're, well, wait, I mean, it didn't happen to you, but it happened to somebody you know. So there's credibility there, right? Oh, no, not so much. I mean, it's like the story of the hook-handed killer. I mean, you had to have heard that one.
Yeah, I think I've heard a piece of things like that, yeah.
A rendition of it. You know?
Yeah, normally it's like I think it was like a car as well. It's like someone pulls over because the light's going out or something, and then someone comes over and the hook scrapes across the door or whatever, or the hook's left there after they die. These sorts of, I've heard several different iterations, as you said, of this general, someone with a hook stopping by a car, horror, teen thing.
Yeah. And I mean, the really interesting too between, folklore and urban legend is the fact that if you tell somebody a piece of folklore, there's a really good chance that they're not going to know what you're telling them, or they're not going to understand it. When you relay an urban legend to somebody, they're like, oh my God, that happened to Susan. Like, they're just like instantly, oh my God, that happened, to a friend of mine. Or, I got a chain letter in the mail today that said, or I got an email today that said whatever. And it turns out to be a chain letter, but they believe it because it's like, well, why would they lie about this happening? Of course there's a gang initiation where, you go to the gas station late at night and somebody cuts your Achilles tendon and pulls you into the back of the car and steals your car and does terrible things to you. Of course that's a thing that happens because people are terrible and the world is terrible. And, of course all of these awful things are going to happen. But folklore is more along the lines of, so this is my culture. And this is the story that I'm telling you so that you will understand a part of my culture. And urban legend is like, this is a story I want to tell you because I want to scare the shit out of you. And for no other reason besides that.
I see. That's a very good way of putting it. I especially liked that story as well. That was incredible. Or the urban legend. It was... Yeah, because with folklore, I kind of think of it as, it is, as you say, as you described it, it's very much wrapped in the culture, because the folklore of just something almost as simple as, forest dwellers. If you think of like folklore when it comes to like going more into the maybe supernatural sort of thing, but you get like fairies and nymphs and sort of tree people and these sort of things, and different parts of the world you go through, and like fairies are quite a common thing in folklore across the world, but the different cultures have different iterations of whether or not they're good or bad, or what they look like, or how they are, or what they do. And there's lots of these little things where it's like almost the black cat thing in a sense. It is that sort of, the way you described it does make it a lot more clear that it is much more intertwined into the culture itself. And it's, is there any sort of folklore that you have that is like absolute, some of your favourite folklore? And if there's any that you'd like to share, because I'd be interested to see what your sort of, what takes your fancy in that sort of realm.
Oh, I am fascinated by anything that involves fairies or the fae. In Newfoundland culture, the stories of fairies permeate that culture because a lot of the people who live in Newfoundland came over from Ireland. So their stories and their culture came over with them. In the outpour communities, one thing they used to do was they'd write out Bible verses on little pieces of paper, and they'd have them blessed by the priest on Sunday. And then they would take those Bible verses and actually sew them into the linings of children's coats. So that it would protect them against fairy attacks.
Right.
Another thing that they would do is they would give their children a piece of hardtack. I don't know if you know what hardtack is.
Is that, I know what blue tack is, the sort of squidgy sort of material thing. Is that what you mean?
No, it's actually, it is a bread. But if you don't soak it in something, you can't chew it because it's tough.
Oh, okay.
And it comes in just plain hard bread and also comes in a sweet variety. I don't know why, because it's awful. But they would take little pieces of that and put it into the children's pockets and say, so, as you're walking home, if it gets to be a little bit later, whatever you do, don't go in the woods, but, make sure that you sprinkle some of this around you because that will appease the fairies and then they won't take you. One interesting thing that both folklore and urban legends have in common that I found is, in the case of folklore is often designed to create a sense of fear or urgency. So you tell little Jimmy not to go into the woods because the fae might get him. It obviously has nothing to do with wild animals or open bodies of water that he could drown in. It's all about the fairies. In the case of urban legends, for example, we were discussing the hook-handed killer. That originated somewhere around like the 1950s in a Dear Abby column, of all places. And it was essentially designed to scare kids from, teenagers from going up onto these lovers' lanes and doing inappropriate things in cars. Because obviously, if you're going to go up there and you're going to do those things, then something bad is going to happen to you. So that, there are definitely commonalities between the two, which I think is probably one of the most interesting things about them, because one of them is designed for cultural purposes, but then there's this little, but also, be careful, late at night, or don't go out on the water, or, don't go in the woods or whatever. And then you have urban legends that basically say the same thing. I don't know how many times my grandmother told me not to go in the woods because there's bad people in the woods. And of course, the one time I go into the woods, there was a bunch of teenagers in there, and I was like 10 years old, and they yelled at me and threw things at me. And oh my God, there's bad people in the woods. They're designed to scare, but they're also designed to kind of keep young people in line.
I see, yeah. And keeping in the sort of line of fear and that sort of thing, the genre, as it were, of sort of horror, is that something that you like to get into when it comes to reading or movies or anything in that sort of realm?
I do enjoy horror movies. The most recent horror novel that I read was Nosferatu by Joe Hill.
Is that like the one that the original movie was based on, or is this a new bit?
No, it's Joe Hill is Stephen King's son.
Oh, okay, very new then. I see.
So he's penned a bunch of novels. Nosferatu was, it was the first horror novel that I'd read in a while. I wasn't really super keen on it. It was it had some interesting elements, and the audiobook version was narrated by Kate Mulgrew, who, best captain in Star Trek history, in my opinion. Fight me on it. I swear to God. But yeah, it was fantastic when read to me. It was not so fantastic when I was reading it myself. I don't know if that, but yeah, as far as horror movies are concerned, most recently I've been really big into all of the older horror movies, like the original Frankenstein, Creature, The Mummy, The Mummy's Curse, The Mummy's Ghost, The Mummy's Hand, I think was another one. What are some other ones? Dracula with Bela Lugosi. We actually have a character who comes on a station called MeTV out of Chicago. His name is Sven Gulli, and he does the same kinds of things that Elvira used to do with movies.
Right. So
she'd come in periodically and narrate and be funny and whatever. And Sven Gulli does basically the same thing, but he shows a lot of these older movies. And I've just been really super into it. The House on Haunted Hill, that's my t-shirt right now.
Oh, nice.
With Vincent Price. Who could live their life having not seen a movie with Vincent Price in it? I don't. That's not living.
That might be me then, because I don't think I've seen a film with Vincent Price in it then, unless I've seen one inadvertently.
Fantastic. He's done romantic roles too, but having seen him in all of the creepy roles, now the romantic roles, it's like, oh well, he's gonna do something. Just he's gonna be a serial killer or something, and then it winds up he just falls in love with the woman and they get married in the end, and I'm like, what the hell? It's supposed to be like Jeffrey Dahmer, Vincent Price. What the hell happened? But yeah.
That's amazing, because I've seen some of the older horror movies and things. It kind of you go back with horror and things, and just like a lot of other stuff, culture, you can really see how things sort of change. Because obviously the amount of reboots of Frankenstein and Wolfman and The Mummy, of course, and sort of every amount of years, like Universal have got their, I think they're starting up like a universe of it as well. And there's like Swamp Thing and all these things. It's so interesting seeing some of the older horror films and what sort of the ideas of them and how brilliant they were, and how obviously with no CGI and very little budget and all that sort of stuff, what they did. One of the biggest examples, it's not that old, but I think it was one of the cornerstone movies, is American Werewolf in London, just where it's got, every shot, and it was just one little bit added to his face as he's transforming. And it's just like, that is so resourceful. And that's what they did a lot of these older films. A lot of them, let's be fair, look very cheesy now, but they are they're brilliant. The way that they actually did them at that time it's incredibly amazing that they managed to do that.
I mean, yeah, and when you consider that American Werewolf in London, I think, was shot in maybe 3 days, like
crazy, whoa,
on a shoestring budget, and just, I mean, yeah, it's a fantastic film, just from a makeup perspective. That film, I think, I would probably put it on the same level, if not a little bit higher, than Pumpkinhead.
I haven't seen Pumpkinhead.
Yeah, Pumpkinhead. That was the guy. Oh my God, they put this poor bastard in stilts.
Ooh.
And he was like 16 feet high in this just huge lumbering costume. Oh, but the story in itself is horrible. It's a horrible movie. But if you like makeup, or like if you're a person who is going to school and studying how to do creature feature makeup, I mean, that is an amazing example. That predated Aliens by a bunch of years. And I mean, that was amazing too. All of the work in Aliens, insane.
Yeah, with H.G. Geiger's concept art and things.
And then I think they did a couple more. They did just one more. They did a sequel, but of course the sequel is always worse than the original, so whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's a close second. With me, it's Pumpkinhead and American Werewolf in London for the makeup.
I think fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think with horror is one of those things where, sort of different genres of film have experiment with sort of different parts of things happening. And one of the things with horror is the special effects makeup. That's almost the best horror films generally, of that time are the ones that have usually got the most amount of budget invested into makeup. Because obviously generally with action films or, comedies or these sorts of things, except maybe sci-fi, but sci-fi kind of teeters on the edge of horror a lot. Obviously with films like Aliens and Predator and things like that, they are sci-fi horror. So, but some of the makeup and things on these, it's like at the top point. And obviously when it comes to James Cameron being involved with it, it's just his, obviously Alien, and then there was obviously not to do with him, that was Ridley Scott, but then Aliens and that obviously franchise that went on and things. Some of the ideas that they get, the concept art that inspired so many different works of horror now, it's just... Sometimes the concept art is always more impressive than some of the things in the films itself. Like H.G. Geiger's work from who obviously basically spawned the idea of Alien and things. Some of his work is mental. It's incredible. Oh yeah, and I mean, you think about that work that's monumental and incredible, and the reason why that work is so monumental and incredible is because the original Frankenstein had to resort to creating a dummy that looked like Frankenstein so that they could perform the final stunt where they light the windmill on fire. And so somebody just threw this dummy out of the top part of the windmill, and it's stuck on one of the prongs on the windmill. So it starts going around and it just falls limply. There's no way in hell that that's an actual person doing that. I mean, nowadays, if they remade it, it would be insane because it would look like an actual person. They would probably do, green screen and like actually physically have somebody be thrown out of the top, of the windmill. But yeah, I mean, makeup has come so far. I mean, you like, even if you stop and think about films like The Exorcist. Yeah. I mean, that makeup, that terrified that actress so much. Linda Blair, it terrified her so much that like she couldn't sleep. It was ridiculous. And, she didn't really even have that much to do with a lot of the filming. Like, the scene where like they spew the pea soup over I mean, she wasn't part of that. She was part of the aftermath, but she wasn't part of like the actual filming. The crucifix scene, the spider crawl, like all that stuff, she wasn't part of any of that, and it still scared the living shit out of her to the point where she needed counseling. Yeah, I heard that sort of thing of her.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about horror movies today and like films like Marianne and The Strangers, and I mean, like, I'm just trying to pull like random examples out of the air, but like we're not even going for like physical horror anymore. We're going for psychological horror now. I feel like The Exorcist was really like a tipping point in terms of psychological horror because you had The Exorcist, you had Rosemary's Baby, films like that really like got in your head. And after the movie, you were like, oh shit, this might actually happen to me. It almost falls into the realm of urban legend, actually. It's kind of crazy.
And that links with Blair Witch. I mean, one of my favorite, if not my favorite horror film ever, is kind of like that film. Obviously, the sequel, I actually quite like the sequel, but the original is the best. It's like, 90 odd minutes of, if people haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it, but they should have seen it by now. It's such a good movie. It's just, you sit there in the dark and silence for, 90 minutes or 80 minutes or whatever. And it's such a thrill ride. And there's so little that happens. And it's all about the brilliance of that film is not seeing what's getting you. Because like with films like Nightmare on Elm Street that I do enjoy and, Friday the 13th, all these sort of, they're kind of going to the realms of slasher in a sense. But like even that Predator or Alien it kind of is on the borderline because when you can see what the thing is, it takes away a lot of it because human imagination is what, when you think of the Blair Witch when they're running away from things and stuff is happening to them, you're like, what the hell could that thing be? Whereas when it's like, in Predator, if you've got Predator coming after you, it is terrifying. But it's not scary because you don't know what it is necessarily, except when he's got the camo, obviously. But generally when you see him for a thing, you're like, oh, it's a big humanoid thing with a gun. And that's what's coming to get me. Yeah. But when it's the unknown, that is when humans fill in the gap with their own mind, that's what's the most scary. Yeah, I mean, the Blair Witch Project had no budget. No, it's literally like a few. I think it's like $30,000 or $90,000. It was like under $100,000, something really small. Yeah, I mean there was absolutely nothing, and it was literally like a bunch of people running around in the woods late at night screaming and snotting all over a camera, which I still can't get that vision out of my head. But just her, yeah, I mean, I know what you're about. God, whatever. But yeah, I mean that film, I mean, there are people that think that film was an actual thing. That was a real thing and it actually happened. And those people are actually dead. But yeah, I mean, you think about films like Cannibal Holocaust and, the director purposefully told the actors that they had to not appear in public for like a year. And that guy got hauled into court because they saw the movie and they thought that he had killed all those people. Wow. So he got hauled into court. And in order to get out of the charges of multiple murders, he had to produce all of these people that had appeared in the movie. So he literally had to call them up and be like, dudes, you guys got to get to the courthouse because I'm about to go to prison or go to the chair or some shit. Because this, it's not going to work out well. So he produced the people and he was like, no, here, they're alive, you're there or whatever, please don't arrest me. But yeah, I mean there have been films that are so visually horrifying that they have changed people for the worse. The Exorcist was one of them. When it first premiered in cinemas, there were people that had complete mental breakdowns and fainted. And I watch that movie now and I don't get any of that, but I can understand way back when, if you went to the cinema, it's like when they first premiered a film called The Tingler. And the Tingler was like this large, earwig thing. And every time the Tingler would appear on screen or be suggested that it was going to appear on screen, some of the seats in the movie theater were actually rigged so that they would buzz. Oh my God. And people lost their fucking minds. I can imagine. Of course they did. But that still happen now. Well, right. But the magic of cinema, right? You might shit your pants, but it'll be an amazing experience that you'll talk about for years. Oh yeah, definitely. It's like there's 4D cinemas that do similar things like that. I remember when I was first in, I think it was in Disney, Honey, I Shrunk My Kids. Oh yeah. And it was just going there and you're like, oh, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience out. And then there's Drop the Rats and then it shoots behind your legs. Yeah. Jesus, what? That's the thrill. I love that sort of thing. And with horror movies, and you get a good horror movie when it doesn't have to be I like jump scares and I like some if they're done tastefully and they're the good ones. Nowadays it's becoming so predictable in every horror film where the first jump scare is like a faux scare. It's always like a bat or some sort of animal. It's every time now. And it's just come on. But, general, most horror films I do enjoy, there's a lot of them which are good, but there aren't that many that I've found, especially in recent ones, that have really, really wowed me. There've been a few that I've really, really enjoyed, but generally horror for me is now changing, and I've never been scared of gore or anything like that. The Saw films, they're not scary to me or anything like that, but they're not that kind of film. But it's interesting that horror, as you say, it has it did do that change, and it's now, I wonder where horror is kind of going to start to sort of go in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've seen Hereditary yet.
I have, yeah. Yeah, I saw it in the cinema, yeah.
I mean, that blew my mind. I was like,
very interesting.
This is really, I mean, I don't want to give anything away.
No, of course.
That is newer. If you haven't seen the Blair Witch Project, they died anyway. But I mean, oh man, yeah, that affected me for like a solid week. And I haven't had anything affect me that much.
It was done in such a masterful way, and obviously not spoiling it, but there's a bit with the classroom and that bit where with the desk, and I was like, that bit was like, geez. So I am interested to see, because there's horror films like Get Out, which have you seen? Which is obviously that was like scary, but that was thrilling. It was a thriller,
right.
you know, and I know the director's made another film called Us, which I haven't seen. But it's like, you know, there are certain gems that come up which are in modern films, but now the market is so saturated, you know. I mean, I love bad horror films. I love them. They're some of my favorite things. But there are so many, like so many. And even ones you want to watch that are good, you go to the cinema and watch the top 5 movies of horror movies, and then half of them just aren't that good anyway. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of the newer, like tomorrow I'm planning on going to see Dr. Sleep.
Oh, yeah, the Shining sequel.
Yeah, I was such a huge fan of the original movie that I was like, well, I have to go see Dr. Sleep. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'm going to be there. So I'm going to go take that in tomorrow and see what I think of it. But I mean, even if you're talking about movies like The Shining, I mean, you know, the people that they cast for that movie, not pointing any fingers, but certain people that they cast should not have been cast in that movie. And it has a lot to do with the terrible acting with the bat towards the end on the staircase. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about it. But I mean, we've come such a long way from that. And I hope that horror movies will continue to be more psychological, more twisted. And also I hope that they take in more of like just everyday life, because life can be horrifying. I mean, if you think about, you know, the film The Strangers, it's just 3 people that come to this house and take these 2 people hostage. I mean, home invasions happen. That's a real thing that happens. So, I mean, even if you take concepts like that and spin them off into horror movies, I mean, I would watch the shit out of that stuff.
Have you seen Eden Lake?
Oh, no, I haven't.
That's a cool film, which is it's a horror film where there's not necessarily, it's not supernatural. That's what I'll say about it. It's one of those sort of movies where it's people, and I find that is some of the scariest. To say, like, I'm not scared that Freddy Krueger is going to go into my dreams and kill me in my sleep, and I'm going to die in real life. I mean, that's a really cool concept, but you know, it's probably one of the coolest concepts in cinema. But as a film of being scary, it doesn't scare me because it's not real. But obviously with Blair Witch, one of the brilliance of that is you don't know what it is. You could just go camping and something could come after you and you don't know what it is, and it could just get you. And that's one of the things a lot of the time with death. It's like, you know, you don't see it necessarily coming. If it was that jet engine, you're walking down the street. I mean, in my head, it's a piano. Like, I think of like the comedic, just someone walking down the street, just a piano. Too many like old Looney Tunes cartoons.
I was going to say that's very Wile E. Coyote of you.
Exactly, what an anvil or something. But we're coming wrapping up near sort of time now. And it's getting late on my end, so we'll start to wrap up a little bit. But this has been an awesome chat. I mean, I didn't even glance at my notes even once, so we're going to have to definitely do this again. Talk about random, crazy, weird stuff. But I didn't know if there's anything you want to add just at the final statement, and then you can plug all your shows and sites and etc.
Well, if anybody is interested in becoming the 4th fan on the Identity Podcast, you can find us on oddentitypod.podbean.com.
I'll include links and stuff to make sure.
Yeah. If you're looking for me on Twitter or Instagram, we're at ODDentityPod. If you would like to read my ramblings on my blog, it is ODDentityPodcast.wordpress.com. That one actually might be wrong.
I think I went on that earlier today. I think it might be that, but I can always, I'll have all your links here in the description for anyone who does want to find them as well.
No, here it is. So it's the ODDentityPodcast.wordpress.com.
There we go.
And if anybody is listening and they want to send me like creepy, weird, paranormal shit that happened to them, I often create minisodes, and I will share those experiences on the show with your permission. So you can send those to the ODDentity Podcast at gmail.com.
Amazing. And also your website, it's a Corvus Review, is that right?
Yes, Corvus Review is not your grandma's lit mag. If you want to send weird, creepy shit, you can send it to Korev Inc. at gmail.com, COREVINK at gmail.com. I'm actually working on the December issue right now, drop December 1st. So that'll be available on the website. But the submission window is always open and it is free to submit. So
that's mainly like short stories and things, isn't it?
Short stories, poetry, art. Yeah, basically anything. I don't really like the squishy stuff, like the romantic stuff. I steer away from religion and politics because I think that that's too messy, but pretty much everything else.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I mean, as I said, I'll have to get you on the show again because it's been absolutely delightful just talking about some of the more macabre things. And yeah, I recommend everyone to go check out your podcast, and I'll include a link in the description and things. But thank you so much, Janine, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And, you know, I mean, just to kind of check out, I have to say what I always say, and that is stay spooky.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Have a good one.
And that's the end of the podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. Be sure to go give Janine Mercer and the ODDentity Podcast all of your love. As you could hear, great person to chat with, and her podcast is amazing too. So, you know, be sure to go check that out. Coming up, I've got 2 podcasts recorded at the moment. They're both only an hour long, so quite easy. Not like a part 1 and part 2 jobby like this one was. One's with a gentleman called John Vespasian, and I always pronounce his surname wrong, so I do apologise for that, John, if you are listening. And the other individual is called Tracy Maxfield. So both of them are very interesting people. They're both authors. John is about sort of making yourself better using history as a way of sort of teaching yourself, in a very layman's way of putting it. He's a really, really interesting guy. And then with Tracy, she speaks about sort of mental health, bullying, and the sort of state of affairs at the moment with mental health. So both of them very interesting people. Don't know which one I'm going to release next. I've got a chat with a gentleman on Monday as well, who is also a podcaster, I believe. So 3 people, very interesting, all in different ways. They're going to be coming up once I've recorded the episode with the gentleman on Monday. I will talk about it a bit more. After that, I think I've got one more episode due for recording with someone else, and then I'm going to try and do it as a month-by-month basis rather than having things ridiculously far planned out, because people seem to pull out if it's too far in advance, and then it means I have no social life for like ages because I've overplanned myself. So trying to kind of take each month as it comes a little bit. You know, February is coming up and I'm not entirely busy the whole of February, which is a first. So trying to do all that sort of jazz. I'm trying to keep up with social media and things, mainly Instagram and things, but I try and post every day, but it's such a ball ache if I'm being completely honest with you. Like, I like sharing my work and I like doing movie reviews and I like showing people my life, but trying to make sure I write a lot of hashtags and do this, that and the other is a pain. And I'm not really one to just see something cool and share on social media every time. Like, it's not really in my nature. I'm not that into social media in a sense. I don't see something cool, post it, and immediately want to put it on Instagram all the time. So I'm trying to do that a bit more, but you know, Instagram's still the best place to find me. Go on there and you can see my story, which is normally videos of my little tortoise, who's a little babby. She's only like 9 months old and she's called Wicket. And currently, as of today, I've got her brother staying with me, who my mum owns. So I've got 2 babby tortoises, which is very cute. Yeah, I don't know what else is there to mention, really. I'm still doing a little comics and motion-y thing, which I will be doing, but that's probably not going to be out till sort of end of February. There's not much else, really, and I'm not going to go into a big rambly mess like I normally do at the end, so I'm going to nip it in the bud quickly. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. Share if you can, show people, and if it's your first time checking the podcast out, go check out the back catalogue. You've got countless episodes to sink your teeth into and probably eventually get sick of my voice. That's how I feel, and I'm sure that's how a lot of my friends feel about it as well. So talk to you guys in a bit. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you all have a great week.